My wife cheated on me with my own brother when I left them and found a new girlfriend. My brother got into a car accident, and she told me that the child is mine. I couldn't wrap my head around what I had just heard. There they were, sitting right in front of me, pretending like they cared about my well-being. Yeah, right. As if they had ever given a damn about how I felt. I may not be the most sensitive guy in the world, but that didn't mean I was made of stone. I had feelings, deep ones, and this news hit me like a sledgehammer straight to the gut. The pain was a slow burn, gnawing away at me until I felt like I was about to pass out from the sheer weight of it. I grew up in the Midwest, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. My parents always called me the quiet kid. It wasn't an insult, it was just how I was. Reserved, cautious. Some would say smart, but honestly, those compliments didn't mean much to me back then. In fact, they often made things worse. I still remember 6th grade, Mrs. Anderson standing in front of the whole class, proudly announcing, "Tommy Blake, you're the brightest student I've taught in my 18 years of teaching." Yeah, thanks for that, Mrs. Anderson. Just what every awkward kid needs, a target on his back. But there was always Danny, my older brother, my anchor. Danny was 2 years older, the complete opposite of me in every way. Where I was quiet, he was loud. Where I stayed in the shadows, he was the center of attention. He was the athlete, the guy who could walk into any room and have everyone laughing within minutes. We were different, but he was my lifeline. Whenever life got too tough, Danny was there, pulling me out of my shell, dragging me into his world. That is, until his friends decided I wasn't cool enough to hang around. It wasn't that we were competing for our parents' attention. We had different things going for us. But when it came down to it, Danny, the golden boy, always seemed to win. Being the athlete just carried more weight than being the brainy kid with his nose stuck in books. I accepted it. College was when things finally changed for me. At the University of Illinois, things were different. Being smart had its perks. I was on a full scholarship, blitzing through my classes, and even managing to have a decent social life. I wasn't the Casanova of the campus, but I had my fair share of relationships. Some were serious, others were casual, but I was doing all right. I thought I had it all figured out by the time I graduated. Then came Sarah. I was 2 years into my career as a financial analyst in Washington, D.C. when I met her. It wasn't some cheesy rom-com moment. We met at a friend's engagement party. Normally, parties were where bad decisions happened, but this was different. Sarah was different. From the moment I saw her, I was hooked. She had this presence, this way of making you feel like the only person in the room. We clicked right away. We started dating, and before I knew it, things got serious. Really serious. Within 3 months, I proposed, and within 6, we were married. It all happened so fast, but it felt right. Our wedding was a modest affair. About 50 guests, nothing too extravagant. My brother Danny was my best man, of course. He was the life of the party, charming everyone, including Sarah. Everything was perfect. Or at least, it seemed that way. We moved into a nice apartment in Arlington, just outside the city. Life was good. Sarah was supportive of my career, and I was moving up the ranks at work. But then, slowly, things started to change. It was subtle at first. Sarah started taking more trips to visit her sister, Rachel, in San Francisco. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Rachel had gone through some tough times after their parents passed, and Sarah was close to her. But the trips became more frequent, and the excuses became flimsier. I should have seen the red flags. In hindsight, they were glaringly obvious. But love has a funny way of blinding you to the truth. One day, out of the blue, Sarah told me she was thinking about going back to school. I was supportive, of course. But when she started asking for more money, saying she needed help with tuition and living expenses, I started to get suspicious. Then came the loan, the one I didn't know about. She had borrowed money without telling me, and now the bank was calling. We had a huge fight about it. I demanded to know why she hadn't told me, why she had been so secretive. Sarah cried, apologizing, saying she didn't want to burden me with her problems. She promised it would never happen again, and like an idiot, I believed her. But things didn't get better. The lies continued. The trips to see Rachel became more frequent, and the distance between us grew wider. Then, my brother Danny moved to D.C. He took a job at a law firm downtown, and suddenly he was around all the time. At first, it was great. Danny and I had always been close, and it was nice to have him nearby. But then I started noticing things, small things. The way Sarah would light up when Danny was around. The way they would laugh at inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. I brushed it off at first, but the seed of doubt had been planted. 6 months later, everything came crashing down. It was a Saturday. I had just come back from a work trip, eager to spend time with Sarah. But when I walked into the apartment, I knew something was off. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her hands shaking. Danny was standing by the window, looking out at the street. The air was thick with tension. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. Sarah looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Tom, I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pregnant? But how?" We hadn't been trying, and besides, the timing didn't add up. I had been gone for weeks at a time for work. The realization hit me like a freight train. The baby wasn't mine. It was Danny's. I don't remember much of what happened next. My world shattered in an instant. My wife, the woman I had promised to love and cherish, had betrayed me. And not just with anyone, with my own brother, my own flesh and blood. The rage that coursed through me was unlike anything I had ever felt. I blacked out, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. I had fainted, hit my head on the coffee table on my way down. The doctors said I had a mild concussion, but the real pain was the betrayal. It felt like a knife to the heart, and the wound wasn't healing. My mother was by my side when I woke up. She tried to console me, but there was nothing she could say to make it better. The damage was done. Danny and Sarah were gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. After that, things were a blur. I quit my job, moved out of the apartment, and cut all ties with Danny and Sarah. I couldn't bear to see them. I couldn't even hear their names without feeling sick. I drifted for a while, moving from city to city, trying to escape the pain. But no matter where I went, the memories followed. It took years for me to rebuild my life. I changed my name, moved to a new city, and started over. I worked as a consultant, taking on freelance projects here and there. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again, but the scars were still there, just beneath the surface. Then, one day, I met Lisa. She was a graphic designer, smart, funny, and unlike anyone I had ever met. We clicked right away, and for the first time in years, I felt something real. We started dating, and things moved fast. Within a year, we were living together, and for the first time in a long time, I was happy. But the past has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. One night, I got a call from my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but something in her voice told me this wasn't just a social call. "Tom," she said, her voice shaking, "it's Danny. He's in the hospital. There's been an accident." My heart stopped. Danny, the man who had betrayed me, the man who had torn my life apart. "What happened?" I asked, my voice cold. "He was in a car accident," she said. "It's bad, really bad." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to hang up, to pretend I hadn't heard her. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times with Danny, the brother I had once loved, couldn't ignore her. "I'm coming," I said, before hanging up the phone. Lisa looked at me, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but I have to go." The hospital was a blur of white walls and beeping machines. When I saw Danny lying there, hooked up to tubes and monitors, a wave of emotions crashed over me. He looked so fragile, so unlike the strong, confident brother I had known. I stood there for what felt like hours, just watching him. Part of me wanted to walk out, to leave him there to suffer the consequences of his actions. But another part of me, the part that still cared, couldn't. As I stood there, I realized something. I had spent so many years consumed by anger and resentment, letting the past control my life. But seeing Danny like this, vulnerable and broken, made me realize that holding on to that anger wasn't doing me any good. It was only hurting me. So I let go. I didn't forgive Danny, not entirely. But I let go of the anger. I let go of the pain. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I turned and walked out of the hospital, leaving the past behind me for good. But the peace didn't last long. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mother again. This time, it wasn't about Danny. It was about Sarah. She had been admitted to the hospital with complications from her pregnancy. The baby was fine, but Sarah wasn't. The doctors were worried, and my mother thought I should know. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to care. But part of me still did. So, once again, I found myself walking into a hospital room, this time to see Sarah. She looked so different from the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She was pale, weak, and scared. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, Tom," she sobbed. "I made a huge mistake. I ruined everything." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling a mixture of anger, pity, and sadness. "I never meant to hurt you," she continued, her voice shaking. I was confused. I thought I loved Danny, but I was wrong. "I still love you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. After everything she had done, after all the lies and betrayal, she still had the audacity to say she loved me. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she had destroyed my life. But instead, I just shook my head. "It's too late, Sarah," I said quietly. "It's over." She cried harder, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I couldn't. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her behind just like I had left Danny. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the pain, free from the anger, free from the past. Lisa and I got married a year later. It was a small wedding, just close friends and family. My parents were there, but Danny and Sarah weren't. I didn't invite them. I didn't want them there. Life moved on. Lisa and I bought a house, started a family. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. But every now and then, I would think about Danny and Sarah, wondering where they were, what they were doing. I never reached out, though. I had made my peace, and I wasn't about to reopen old wounds. Then, one day, out of the blue, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Danny. "Tom," it read, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. I'm dying." My heart skipped a beat as I read those words. Danny was dying? I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to crumple up the letter and throw it away, but another part of me, the part that still cared, kept reading. "I don't have much time left," the letter continued. "I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors say I only have a few months. I don't expect you to forgive me for what I did, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I made a huge mistake, and I've regretted it every day since. I just wanted you to know that before it's too late." I sat there, staring at the letter, my mind racing. Danny was dying. He was sorry. He wanted forgiveness. I didn't know what to do. I had spent so many years hating him, resenting him for what he had done. But now, faced with the reality of his mortality, all that anger seemed so pointless. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Hello?" came a weak voice on the other end. "Danny," I said, my voice shaking. "It's Tom." There was a long pause. "Tom," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "I didn't think you'd call." "I got your letter," I said quietly. "I'm sorry, Danny. I'm sorry for everything." And for the first time in years, we talked. We talked about the past, about what had happened, about the mistakes we had made. And in that moment, I realized that life was too short to hold on to grudges. We were brothers, after all. And no matter what had happened between us, that would never change. Danny passed away a few months later. I was by his side when it happened, holding his hand as he took his last breath. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with sadness, but also with peace. I had lost my brother, but in the end, I had found forgiveness. The day Danny died, something inside me shifted permanently. I had spent so many years being angry, angry at him, angry at Sarah, angry at the world for giving me a life I felt was twisted and wrong. But at his bedside, holding his hand as he took his last breath, it was like a release. The resentment I'd been carrying dissolved, leaving me hollow and unsure of what came next. After the funeral, I spent a lot of time with Lisa, just trying to regain my footing. The house was quiet. We didn't have any children at the time, and I began to wonder if it was time. Time to put down roots, focus on building a family, and leave the past behind for good. Lisa had always wanted kids, and I knew it was the next logical step for us. But something held me back, an old fear I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the thought that history might repeat itself, or that I wasn't ready to take on the responsibility of someone else's life. It was as if the ghost of Danny's betrayal still lingered, reminding me that love and family were fragile things, easily shattered. Lisa, patient as always, never pushed. She knew me too well. She understood that I needed time, and in those months after Danny's death, she gave me space to grieve and process, even though she never said it out loud. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, Lisa finally spoke the words that had been hanging in the air between us for months. "Tom," she began softly, "I think it's time." I didn't look at her, instead keeping my eyes on the horizon. Time for what? For us to start thinking about having kids. I knew it was coming, but the words still hit me like a cold splash of water. I took a deep breath, unsure of how to respond. I loved Lisa more than anything, but the idea of bringing a child into this world filled me with a fear I couldn't explain. "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa didn't respond right away, giving me time to let the words hang in the air. Then, finally, she reached over and placed her hand on mine. "I know," she said, her voice full of understanding, "but I think we'll never be fully ready. I think that's just part of life." I turned to look at her then, and in her eyes, I saw the quiet strength that had carried me through some of the darkest moments of my life. She was right, of course. Life didn't wait for you to be ready. It just happened, and you had to adapt or be left behind. "Let's give it some more time," I said, feeling the weight of my own hesitation. I need to make sure I'm in the right headspace for this." Lisa nodded, her hand squeezing mine. "Whenever you're ready, Tom. I'm not going anywhere." That was the thing about Lisa. She was solid. She was always there, a constant in my life when everything else had felt chaotic and uncertain. And maybe that was what I needed to finally let go of the last vestiges of fear, her unwavering support. But life, as I'd learned many times before, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. About a year after Danny's death, when I was finally beginning to feel like I could move forward, I got another letter in the mail. This one wasn't from Danny, though. It was from Sarah. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the envelope, my heart racing. I hadn't heard from Sarah since Danny's funeral, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But there it was in my hands, a letter, handwritten, her familiar looping script staring back at me. "Are you going to open it?" Lisa's voice cut through my thoughts. I glanced up to see her standing in the doorway, a concerned look on her face. She had always known about Sarah, about the pain and betrayal that had defined so much of my past. And she knew, without me saying a word, who the letter was from. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice tight with uncertainty. "Do I even want to know what she has to say?" Lisa shrugged, leaning against the counter. "That's up to you. But maybe it's better to know than to keep wondering." I sighed, knowing she was right. With shaky hands, I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but each word felt like a punch to the gut. "Tom, I've been thinking a lot about you lately. I know we haven't spoken since the funeral, and I'm not sure you want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something important. I've been doing a lot of soul searching, trying to figure out where my life went wrong. I've made so many mistakes, and I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But there's something I need you to know. The baby, he's not Danny's. He's yours." I stopped reading, my eyes frozen on those last words. My heart felt like it had stopped beating, and the room seemed to tilt slightly. I could hear Lisa saying something in the background, but it was as though the world had gone silent. Everything around me faded away, and all I could focus on were those 4 words. "He's not Danny's. He's yours." The air left my lungs in a rush, and I had to steady myself against the counter to keep from falling over. This couldn't be real. Sarah was lying. She had to be. But then, why would she lie about this now, after all these years? What could she possibly gain from this? Lisa was by my side in an instant, her hand on my arm, concern etched into her face. Tom? What's wrong? What does it say? I shook my head, unable to speak. I handed her the letter, and she read it quickly, her eyes widening as she reached the same part one had. Oh my God, she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Tom, what are you going to do? I didn't know. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with this information. My mind was spinning, and I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. How could this be possible? How could she have kept this from me for so long? For the next few days, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything other than what Sarah had told me. I kept going over every detail in my mind, replaying our last few years together, trying to figure out how I had missed this. How could I not have known? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront Sarah. I needed answers. I called her, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. It had been years since I'd last heard her voice, and when she picked up, it sent a shiver down my spine. Hello? She answered, her voice cautious. It's Tom, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, finally, she sighed. I figured you'd call, she said quietly. I knew that letter would get to you eventually. What the hell, Sarah? I demanded, my anger bubbling up to the surface. You kept this from me for years. Why? Why now? I didn't know how to tell you, she said, her voice breaking. I was scared, Tom. I was scared of what it would mean for you. For me, for Danny. I was scared you'd hate me even more. Hate you. I laughed bitterly. You think this is about hate? You took away my chance to know my own child, Sarah. You took away everything. I know, she whispered, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I know I did, and I'm so sorry. I can't change what happened, but I didn't want to keep lying to you. I had to tell you the truth. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash all the anger and pain I had been holding onto for years. But another part of me, the part that was still reeling from the shock, just wanted answers. Is it true? I asked, my voice shaking. Is he really mine? Yes, she said, barely audible. I never told Danny. I didn't want to destroy everything. But the truth is, I knew from the beginning. The timeline didn't add up, and deep down, I knew. He's yours, Tom. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My legs gave way, and I sank into a chair, my head spinning. My child. I had a son, and I had never known. What do I do now? I asked, more to myself than to her. I don't know, she admitted, but he deserves to know the truth. I know I messed up, but you deserve to be part of his life. I didn't respond right away. I was too numb, too overwhelmed to process everything. But one thing was clear. I needed to meet him. I needed to know my son. The day I met Ryan, my son, was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Sarah had arranged for us to meet at a park, a neutral place where we could talk without the pressure of being in anyone's home. I was nervous, my palms sweating as I waited by the playground, watching the kids run around and play. When I finally saw them walking toward me, my heart skipped a beat. Ryan was tall for his age, with sandy brown hair and bright blue eyes that looked so much like my own. He had the same serious expression I used to wear as a kid, the same cautious look in his eyes. It was like looking at a younger version of myself, and it took everything in me not to break down right then and there. Sarah gave me a small smile as they approached, but I barely noticed her. My eyes were fixed on Ryan, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan, Sarah said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. This is Tom. He's someone very important. Ryan looked up at me, his eyes wide and curious. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, as if trying to figure me out. Hi, I said, my voice shaky. It's nice to meet you, Ryan. Hi, he replied, his voice small. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of everything hanging between us. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain to this kid that I was his father, that I had missed so much of his life without even knowing he existed? I know this is a lot, I said finally, kneeling down so I was at eye level with him. I just want you to know that I'm really happy to meet you. Ryan didn't say anything, but he didn't look scared or upset. He just nodded, his eyes still wide as he studied me. Sarah cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Why don't we go sit over there?" she suggested, gesturing to a bench under a tree. "We can talk for a bit." We walked over to the bench and sat down, the three of us awkwardly trying to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. I had so many questions, but I didn't want to overwhelm Ryan. I had to take it slow. "Do you like baseball?" I asked, trying to find some common ground. "I used to play a lot when I was your age." Ryan's face lit up a little. "Yeah, I play for my school team." "Really? That's awesome. What position do you play?" "Shortstop." I smiled, feeling a small sense of relief that we had found something to talk about. "I used to play shortstop too. It's a tough position, but I bet you're really good at it." Ryan smiled shyly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something. A connection, maybe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few months, I spent as much time with Ryan as I could. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of awkward moments as we tried to get to know each other. But slowly, we began to build a relationship. I took him to baseball games, helped him with his homework, and even introduced him to Lisa, who was incredibly supportive throughout the whole process. It wasn't long before Ryan started calling me Dad, and when he did, it felt like my heart was going to burst. I had missed so much of his life, but now I had a chance to be the father I had always wanted to be. As for Sarah, things between us remained complicated. We were civil for Ryan's sake, but the wounds from the past were still there, lingering beneath the surface. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive her for what she had done, but I was grateful that she had finally told me the truth. In the end, it wasn't about forgiveness or revenge. It was about moving forward, about finding a way to build a future that wasn't defined by the mistakes of the past. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally doing that. Life moved on, and before I knew it, years had passed. Ryan grew up, and so did I. Lisa and I had a daughter of our own, Emily, and our family felt complete. There were still moments when the past would creep up on me, when I would think about Danny and Sarah and everything that had happened. But those moments became fewer and farther between as time went on. One day, as I was sitting on the porch with Lisa, watching Ryan and Emily play in the yard, I realized something. I had spent so many years running from the past, trying to escape the pain and betrayal. But in the end, it was the people I loved who had helped me heal. It was Lisa, with her unwavering support. It was Ryan, with his quiet strength. And it was Emily, with her boundless energy and joy. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me anymore. What mattered now was the future, the family I had built, the love I had found, and the peace I had finally made with myself. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Life has a funny way of giving you what you least expect. After years of struggling to find peace, of wrestling with the betrayals that had shattered my life, I finally felt like I had things figured out. Lisa and I had built a good life together, one filled with love and stability. Ryan had grown into a fine young man, and Emily was the light of our lives. My relationship with Sarah, though strained, was cordial for Ryan's sake, and I felt like I had finally found my place in the world. But just when you think you've got everything under control, life throws you another curveball. It was a cold, gray morning when I got the call. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and scrolling through the morning news when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Hello? Is this Tom Blake?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Tom. Who's calling?" "My name is Dr. Stevens. I'm calling from the Valley Hospital in San Francisco. I'm afraid I have some difficult news regarding Sarah Davis." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah. I hadn't heard anything from her in over a year, not since Ryan had started college, and we had both agreed to keep our interactions to a minimum. She had moved back to California, and as far as I knew, she was trying to rebuild her life. We had our separate worlds now, and that was how I liked it. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tight with apprehension. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but Sarah has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She has been in and out of the hospital for the last few months, and her condition has deteriorated rapidly. She specifically asked that we reach out to you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Cancer? Sarah? It didn't seem real. How could someone who had once been such a vital part of my life now be facing something like this? Despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't help but feel a deep pang of sadness. What does she want from me? I finally managed to ask. She would like to see you, Dr. Stevens said gently. She doesn't have much time left, and she feels there are some things she needs to say before it's too late. I sat there, staring at the wall, my mind racing. What could she possibly have left to say? After everything she had done, lying about Ryan, destroying my relationship with Danny, what more could there be? I'll think about it, I said, my voice hollow. Thank you for letting me know. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, trying to process the news. Lisa walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, her brow furrowed with concern when she saw the look on my face. Tom, what's wrong? I looked up at her, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. It's Sarah. She's dying. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. Part of me didn't want to go, didn't want to reopen the old wounds that had taken years to heal. But another part of me, the part that still cared, despite everything, knew that I had to face her one last time. I had to hear whatever it was she needed to say, if only for the sake of closure. It took me a week to finally make the decision. I booked a flight to San Francisco, leaving Lisa and the kids behind for a few days. Lisa understood, as she always did, and gave me her full support. Do whatever you need to do, she said as I packed my bag. But don't let her drag you back into the past. You've come too far to let that happen. I won't, I promised, though deep down, I wasn't so sure. There was still a part of me that hadn't fully let go of the pain, and I knew that seeing Sarah again might stir up emotions I wasn't ready to face. When I arrived at the hospital, it was like stepping into a different world. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the beeping of machines echoed down the hallways. As I walked towards Sarah's room, my heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't seen her in years, and I wasn't sure what to expect. When I finally reached her room, I stood outside the door for a moment, gathering my courage. Then, taking a deep breath, I knocked softly and pushed the door open. The woman lying in the hospital bed barely resembled the Sarah I once knew. She was frail and pale, her skin stretched thin over her bones. Her hair, once thick and vibrant, was now sparse and gray. But when she opened her eyes and saw me standing there, a flicker of recognition passed across her face. Tom, she whispered, her voice weak but filled with emotion. You came. I nodded, stepping into the room and pulling a chair up to her bedside. I'm here. For a few moments, we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything that had passed between us hanging heavy in the air. I didn't know what to say, and neither did she. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry for everything. I looked down at my hands, my emotions a tangled mess. It's too late for apologies, Sarah. I know, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. But I need you to know that I regret everything. I ruined your life, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let go of the anger and pain that had consumed me for so long. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, wasn't ready to let go. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you lie about Ryan? Why did you destroy everything we had? Sarah closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. I was scared, she admitted. Scared of losing you, scared of what it would mean for me, for Danny, for all of us. I thought I could fix things, that if I lied long enough, it would all work out. But it didn't. I only made everything worse. I sat there, staring at her, trying to make sense of it all. In the end, it didn't matter. The damage was done, and there was no going back. But as I looked at her, frail and dying, I realized something. I had spent so many years hating her, so many years letting that anger define me. And now, here she was, at the end of her life, filled with regret. What good would it do to hold on to that hate any longer? I forgive you, I said quietly, the words surprising even me. Sarah opened her eyes, a look of disbelief crossing her face. You do? I nodded, though it wasn't easy. Yeah, I do. I'm tired of holding on to the past. It's time to let it go. A small, fragile smile touched her lips. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I ever wanted. We sat in silence for a while after that, neither of us knowing what else to say. There was so much history between us, so much pain. But in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. When it was time to leave, I stood up and looked down at Sarah, knowing this would be the last time I ever saw her. Goodbye, Sarah, I said softly. Goodbye, Tom, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the woman who had once been such a huge part of my life. And as I stepped out into the cold San Francisco air, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The past was finally behind me. When I returned home, I told Lisa everything. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine as I spoke. When I was finished, she nodded, a look of understanding in her eyes. I'm proud of you, she said softly. I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't, I admitted. But it was something I had to do. For Ryan, for us, for me. Lisa smiled, her eyes filled with love and compassion. You've come a long way, Tom. You're not the same man you were back then. I looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude for everything she had done for me, for the way she had stood by me through all the ups and downs. I wouldn't be where I am today without you, I said, squeezing her hand. She leaned in and kissed me, her lips soft against mine. We're a team, Tom. Always have been, always will be. And in that moment, I knew she was right. No matter what life threw at us, no matter how many challenges we faced, we would face them together. Life moved on, as it always does. Sarah passed away a few weeks after I visited her, and I flew back to California for the funeral. It was a small, quiet affair, attended by a handful of people. Ryan was there, of course, and though we hadn't been close to Sarah in recent years, he stood by her grave with tears in his eyes. I stood beside him, my hand resting on his shoulder, offering silent support. After the funeral, Ryan and I sat together in the small reception hall, sipping coffee and talking quietly. Are you okay? I asked, watching him closely. Ryan nodded, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. Yeah, I think so. It's just weird, you know? I didn't really know her that well, but she was still my mom. I know, I said, feeling a pang of guilt for the distance that had grown between Ryan and Sarah. I'm sorry you didn't get more time with her. Ryan shrugged, his gaze distant. It is what it is. I'm just glad I had you. My heart swelled at his words, and I reached over to give his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I'm glad I had you too. We sat in silence for a while after that, just enjoying each other's company. Despite everything that had happened, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life I had now. Ryan was a good kid. No, a good man. And I was proud of the person he had become. As the years passed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ryan graduated from college and moved to New York to start his career, while Emily grew into a bright, energetic teenager who kept Lisa and me on our toes. My consulting business continued to thrive, and Lisa's design work took off in ways we had never imagined. We were busy, but happy, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But life, as always, had more in store for me. One evening, as I was sitting in my office going over some paperwork, the phone rang. It was Ryan, and from the tone of his voice, I could tell something was wrong. Dad, he said, his voice tense. I need to talk to you about something. It's important. My heart immediately sank. What's going on? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Ryan finally spoke, his voice was filled with uncertainty. It's about Mom. Sarah. What about her? I asked, my stomach knotting with anxiety. I found something she left behind for me. A letter. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what he was saying. A letter? After all these years? What could she possibly have left behind that would still matter now? What does it say? I asked, my voice tight with apprehension. Ryan hesitated for a moment before answering. It says that there's more to the story. About you, about me, about everything. A cold chill ran down my spine. More to the story? What did that mean? I had thought that everything had finally been resolved, that the truth had come out, and that the past was behind us. I don't understand, I said, feeling a growing sense of dread. What do you mean? I don't know, Ryan admitted, his voice shaky, but I think you need to come to New York. We need to talk about this in person. I didn't hesitate. I'll be on the next flight. The flight to New York was a blur of anxiety and confusion. My mind raced with questions, none of which I could answer. What could Sarah have left behind that was so important? What more could there possibly be after everything we had been through? When I arrived at Ryan's apartment, he greeted me at the door with a somber expression. He looked older, more serious than I had ever seen him, and it made my heart ache to see the worry etched on his face. "Hey, Dad," he said, giving me a brief hug. "Hey," I replied, my voice tight. "What's going on?" Ryan didn't say anything right away. Instead, he led me into the living room, where he handed me a small, folded letter. The paper was yellowed with age, and the handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. "She left this for me," Ryan said quietly. "I found it in a box of her things after the funeral." With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Ryan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know there's so much I never told you, and I'm sorry for that. I made so many mistakes in my life, and I wish I could take them all back. But there's one thing you need to know. One final truth that I've kept hidden all these years. Tom isn't your father." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My hands shook, and I had to sit down, my legs no longer able to support me. I read the sentence again and again, hoping it would change, hoping I had misunderstood. But there it was, in black and white. "Tom isn't your father." "What?" I started, my voice barely a whisper. "What does this mean?" Ryan sat down beside me, his face pale and tense. "I don't know, Dad. I don't know." I continued reading, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know this will come as a shock to you, and I wish I could be there to explain everything in person. But the truth is, I made a terrible mistake many years ago. There was someone else before Tom, someone I thought I had left behind. But when you were born, I knew the truth. You weren't Tom's son. You were his." I could barely breathe as I read the words. This couldn't be happening. After all these years, after everything we had been through, how could Sarah still have kept something like this from us? "Who?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Who was she talking about?" Ryan shook his head, his face a mask of confusion. "I don't know, Dad. She didn't say. There's nothing else in the letter." I sat there, staring at the letter, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Everything I had believed about my life, about Ryan, about our family, everything was a lie. "Dad," Ryan said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever this means, it doesn't change anything. You're still my father. You always will be." I looked at him, my heart breaking as I saw the pain in his eyes. "I know," I whispered, "but I need to know the truth." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of confusion and pain. Ryan and I hired a private investigator to try and uncover the truth about Sarah's past, but it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. There were no records, no clues, nothing that pointed to the identity of Ryan's biological father. As the investigation dragged on, I felt my world slipping out of control. Everything I had built, everything I had believed in, was unraveling before my eyes. I tried to focus on my work, on my family, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on me like a boulder. One evening, as I sat alone in my office, I received a call from the investigator. "We found something," he said, his voice cautious, "but I'm not sure you're going to like it." My heart raced. "What is it?" There was a man. His name was David Harrison. He was close to Sarah before she married you. They had a complicated relationship. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Is he Ryan's father?" The investigator hesitated. "It's possible. He died a few years ago, so we can't confirm anything with him directly. But based on the information we've gathered, it's likely." I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation crashing down on me. David Harrison, a man I had never met, never even heard of, was possibly Ryan's real father. How was I supposed to process this? How was I supposed to explain this to Ryan? I'm sorry, Tom, the investigator said gently. I wish I had better news. Thank you, I said quietly before hanging up the phone. That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Lisa lay beside me, her breathing soft and steady, but I couldn't shake the thoughts racing through my mind. Everything felt so fragile, like my entire world was on the verge of collapse. The next morning, I called Ryan and told him what I had learned. He took the news better than I expected, though I could hear the strain in his voice. Do you want to do a DNA test? I asked, though I already knew the answer. No, Ryan said firmly. I don't need a test to know who my father is. It doesn't matter what some letter says or what some investigator finds. You're my dad, and that's all that matters to me. I felt a surge of emotion at his words, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. In the end, the truth about Ryan's biological father didn't change anything between us. I was still his father in every way that mattered, and our bond remained as strong as ever. But the experience left me shaken, a reminder that life is never as simple as we want it to be. There will always be secrets, always be things we can't control, but it's how we handle those challenges that defines who we are. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the trees, I realized something. No matter what had happened in the past, no matter how many lies and betrayals had been uncovered, I had built a life worth living. I had a family who loved me, a son who saw me as his father, and a wife who stood by me through thick and thin. And that was enough. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace.